Hello and welcome again to Rewind. I'm Elizabeth Puranam. Since we launched Al Jazeera English more than a decade ago, we've tackled many difficult and sensitive stories across the world. Today, we're rewinding to August 2014 when the Fault Line series travelled to Ferguson, Missouri in the midst of street unrest following the police shooting of a young African American. Michael Brown was just 18 and unarmed when he was shot by a white police officer after being stopped while walking with a friend. In the hours after the shooting, the residents of this mostly black area of Ferguson took to the streets to protest against the killing and to demand that the police officer should be named. The police responded by flooding the area with armed officers in riot gear and military-style equipment. By the time night fell, the streets of Ferguson looked like a war zone. It was the beginning of more than a week of street protests, which divided public opinion in the United States. And within days, Sebastian Walker and his Fault Line's crew were in Ferguson to see for themselves the nature of both the uprising and the police response. From Fault Lines in August 2014, here's Ferguson, city under siege.
Ferguson, Missouri. The spark for what would become daily street protests was the killing of an unarmed African-American teenager. In the days that followed, the police responded to the demonstrations with massive force.
Y'all the government flag.
It's an uprising. We are sick of the police.
Force is their message. We will shoot, we will kill if necessary.
An autopsy would show that Brown was shot at least 6 times, twice in the head. He was the 4th unarmed black man to be killed in the United States by police in the span of a month. The street protests and police tactics brought Ferguson into the national and international spotlight. Things quickly spiraled. Reports of gunshots fired from the crowd. A state of emergency was declared. The National Guard was deployed, and the U.S. Attorney General launched a federal investigation into the killing. Fault Lines was in Ferguson to witness how Michael Brown's killing sparked something bigger, exposing tensions that had been bubbling beneath the surface for years.
On his knees, hands up.
Let's go.
No peace, no justice, no peace.
This is the area Ferguson's residents are calling Ground Zero, the epicenter of the protests. When we arrived, it was the 4th day in a row that people were marching along this street, just a few blocks from where Michael Brown was shot. The police had still not released the name of the officer involved, and people were angry. Mistrust of the police here runs deep. While more than 60% of Ferguson's residents are black, 50 out of its 53 police officers are white. African Americans account for nearly 90% of police stops, searches, and arrests. The demonstrators made it clear they would remain peaceful and requested the police to do the same.
We are not out here to start trouble.
That's right.
Please don't harass us.
Sit down for Michael Brown. Sit down for Michael Brown.
But for no reason that we could see, the mood shifted very quickly.
This is the police department. You must continue moving down West Florissant. The town can't be open in a peaceful manner.
So the police are now bringing out these heavy armored vehicles. You can see it's a Lenco armored truck. This is something that's designed for basically conflict zones to fight in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. This is an extraordinary display of force, to be honest. I mean, these guys are armed to the teeth. There's more riot police arriving behind them. This is a crowd of just a few hundred people, and it's been completely peaceful all afternoon. The guys on top of these vehicles are actually training high-powered weapons on members of the crowd
You
here.
must disperse in a peaceful manner.
The police refused to explain why they needed such heavy weaponry.
So do you know why they're bringing this equipment in?
You all need to move back some, okay?
Do you know why they're bringing in armored vehicles?
We are from here. Mike can't go home.
Ask you to continue.
It wasn't hard to see why the crowd would see the police presence as anything other than inflammatory.
Would you like army men with machine gun pointing at your kids? You don't think that's provoking? They provoking it. They asked them to move out the street. Do you see any violence occurring right now? It's peaceful. They don't have to be here.
Has it been like this the last few days?
It's been like this for years. For years.
This kind of policing?
Yes. It's been like this for years.
But the anger over the way police were handling the situation grew.
Oh, only cowards use guns.
Come on, keep laughing. It's funny, right?
Only cowards.
It's funny, right?
The police are saying we've got to leave the area. We're going to get right back now from the police line. The gas is coming down now. There's more gas coming over here. We're going to get out of here now. They're actually firing canisters of gas at us as we're running away.
You must return to your vehicles or return to your homes. You may no longer be in the area. It is no longer a peaceful protest. You are not peacefully assembling. You must leave or be subject to arrest.
It's about us not feeling like criminals just for driving down the street.
We're supposed to be innocent. It's my job. We're always guilty until proven innocent.
Why do you think they started firing gas?
Why do you think they started firing gas? Because they're trying to get us to incite a riot over here. They're trying to. They're encroaching on our First Amendment rights.
Won't be no mass incarceration when the revolution comes. Won't be no police brutality.
We can hear that noise. The police are now using an audio instrument to try to disperse the crowd. This is a crowd control tool. You can see the protesters are still in the streets and they're saying that they're not going anywhere. Okay, it seems like they're throwing flash bombs now. There's explosions going off. We're not quite sure what the police are firing, but there's gas coming down too. We're going to get out of here.
In a matter of hours, the streets of Ferguson had gone from peaceful protest and calls for justice to scenes out of a conflict zone.
There's a line of police advancing towards the crowd here. There's tear gas everywhere. There's explosions from flashbang grenades. There's another one going off now.
As the military vehicles advanced, rubber bullets were fired. Anyone on the streets, including media, was in the line of fire. After days of largely staying silent, Missouri's governor finally showed up in Ferguson, promising changes.
Today, I'm announcing that the Missouri Highway Patrol, under the supervision of Captain Ron Johnson, who grew up in this area, will be directing the team that provides security in Ferguson. Yeah.
Governor, how would you explain the nature of the presence that we saw on the streets yesterday? I mean, there were armored personnel carriers, about 100 police in military-style uniform, high-powered rifles being trained on the crowd. I mean, who is in charge of making those decisions, and are they going to be held to account for mistakes that you clearly think have been made?
No, I think that that was yesterday, tonight's tonight, tomorrow's tomorrow. Captain Johnson.
I appreciate the significance of this responsibility.
Looking forward meant a new face for the police command, Captain Ron Johnson, who was born in the community.
Don't shoot! Don't shoot!
The scene on Thursday was very different from the previous night of tear gas and military vehicles. There seemed to be fewer police, and those who were there walked the streets with the protesters. The change in approach seemed to lift the mood. But that atmosphere was short-lived. The next morning, Ferguson's police chief finally announced the name of Darren Wilson, the officer who had killed Michael Brown. But almost in the same breath, he also released this video footage. It allegedly showed Brown stealing cigars from a convenience store in an unrelated incident. His grieving family was incensed. The motives for releasing the video and its timing were immediately questioned.
Did he know that he was a suspect in a case, or did he not know?
And you say you're concerned about our safety, but it seems like you're only concerned about your officer's safety.
I'm going to read you a statement here. Michael Brown's family is beyond outraged at the devious way the police chief has chosen to disseminate piecemeal information in a manner intended to assassinate the character of their son. What's your response to that?
We have given you everything that we have now and everything that we can give you. So that's from our police department. You have everything we've got. There's nothing else that I can give you.
Chief Jackson, the timing of the release of this video.
Michael Brown's family held an impromptu press conference outside the police station in response.
This is just something that people do to try to diverge the attention from what the real problem is.
Condemning what they branded as an attempt to criminalize him and justify the officer's actions.
So whatever that took place there had nothing to do with an individual getting down on his hands and knees, raising his hands in the air and saying, "Don't shoot." This is a universal code for I surrender. And I can hear my cousin's voice right now as I speak saying, "Don't shoot."
Down at Ground Zero, later that evening, news of the video's release had spread. People were angry. But instead of trying to diffuse the tension by minimizing police presence, the armored vehicles were out once again. It didn't take long before things started to happen. Soon, a small group started smashing store windows.
Okay, well, there's looting starting now. You can see people have actually broken into this. Okay. Let's get out of here,
But then another group of young men quickly moved in to stop the looting.
Why are you standing here?
To protect and serve the store.
We're not all.
It ain't just us. You see, it's a group over there. It's a group over there. It's a group down there. We ain't stopping everybody from going to the store. You see the store still here. They finna set it on fire.
They finna burn it.
Stop!
So the guys protecting the convenience store are saying that they blame the police for inflaming the situation, appearing in this manner in the armored vehicles and the riot gear again. And they say that's the reason why people got angry, started looting stores. We're gonna go and try and speak to the police and ask why they deployed like this after everything that's happened. So media. Who's in charge here?
What do you need?
Who's the commanding officer right here?
What do you need?
I need to speak to the commanding officer.
Stay right here.
Thank you. Are you the commanding officer?
No, but what we need is you to get to a safe spot, please.
We've been spending time with the crowd, and they're asking why the police deployed in this way with the armored vehicles and the military gear, because their understanding was that was going to be a...
We're trying to maintain safety.
But why did you feel it was necessary to bring out the armored vehicles?
We're done talking.
Was there a reason for...
We're done talking. You need to either go ahead back wherever you want to be. We're done talking.
Is there anyone I can speak to? Is there a press officer or anyone? There's no media contact here at all?
Not right now, no.
That's... What?
Sir, we're done.
The state had promised a different approach, but the militarized response was back, and no one could tell us why. Meanwhile, down the street, the police continued advancing on the protesters.
Stay back!
The looting had stopped, but it seemed like anger and distrust were growing once again.
Straighten up!
Did y'all hear about the first riots?
Yeah.
What do you think? It was an outcry. That's pure emotion. If everybody feeling the way, these kids doing this, these kids have no outlet. You want to know the truth? Talk to the oppressed.
During the protests on the streets of Ferguson, we'd met Miller, Ronald, and Solomon. They'd been out demonstrating every night since the shooting. They're from northern St. Louis County, an area that includes Ferguson and is predominantly African American. Their anger and frustration at the police ran deep.
Because they just harass you, they treat you like you don't belong over there.
Who do? The police?
The police.
Yeah, we got 2 strikes, and that's black and male. That's our 2 strikes. So all we gotta do is miss a blinker, and we stretched out in the middle of the street.
That's what people say?
Yes.
2 strikes?
You make a face at a cop, strike 3, you're out. You're going to jail for something.
It's not just a perception of unfair treatment.
They have no connection to them culturally other than as police officers patrolling that area and enforcing the law.
Adolphus Pruitt is head of the local NAACP chapter, which filed a federal civil rights complaint against the St. Louis County Police for disproportionately targeting blacks.
A young black kid can live in an urban area, and when he leaves his house and he's going for a walk, or he's going to work, or he's going to school, he's subject to be stopped by police. He's subject to be questioned. He's subject to have to produce identification. He's subject to be ran through the system to see if he has any outstanding warrants. And in some cases, that happen for no reason at all.
Even if they avoid the police, these young men have other odds stacked against them. The unemployment rate for African Americans in this county is 3 times that of whites.
St. Louis is probably one of the most segregated communities in the country, both racially and socioeconomically. As African Americans move in, whites move out. And what happens also with that is some of the highest paying jobs, some of the best of living conditions go with them.
Among black males aged 16 to 24, the unemployment rate has reached nearly 50%.
Coming back to losing hope. What do we have to bank on after school? I went to college, got my medical assistant. I wanted to be in the medical field. They found out I had a felony. Guess what happened? I spent $20,000 for nothing. I get my hands dirty working on cars now.
How does that make you feel?
Like a bag of What I'm supposed to do?
Does it make you angry?
Hell yeah.
So when people talk about the anger that they feel, it's not just about law enforcement. It's about life in general.
Yeah. Some people want to roll over and take it. We got older generations that just be like, hey, don't talk to the police like that and stuff like that, and we won't be saying nothing. Crazy. They be like, don't talk, just be quiet, just be quiet. And I was like, what happened to freedom of speech?
Mm-hmm.
Why is mine modified? What happened?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
The Ferguson Police Department declined our repeated requests for an interview.
This is bigger than Mike Brown. This is bigger than Trayvon Martin. This is about making sure it doesn't happen again.
Like, don't pacify us for a minute.
Don't throw us a bone and then think you're gonna be able to get away with your daughter or my son. No, it stops. It shouldn't have never happened.
After more than 2 weeks of protests, on August the 25th, the community of Ferguson came together for a day of mourning as Michael Brown's family laid their son to rest. The family had asked for calm. At St. Peter's Cemetery, a crowd of family members and friends watched as Michael Brown's coffin was buried. As the mourners went home, Michael Brown's mother said her final goodbyes to her son.
I know a lot of people thought this was going to be a fly-by-night situation. It was going to be a fly-by-night movement. But I tell you what, when you aim rubber bullets and tear gas at young brothers who ain't got nothing, and they stand there and look them right back in the eye and say, today can be the day. I'm a fan of Tupac Shakur. He said when it's on for life. So it's on for life. You hear me?
The day after the funeral, in downtown St. Louis, people gathered to announce the foundation of a new movement. It's called Hands Up United.
Seems like everywhere we go,
we get laid down, we get executed.
Well, the demonstrators here say they're going to march to the office of the U.S. Attorney here in St. Louis, and they're calling for an investigation, a nationwide investigation of systematic police brutality.
The US Department of Justice later announced it was launching a broad civil rights investigation into the practices of the Ferguson Police Department, separate from its investigation of the Michael Brown shooting. But for this group and the community they represent, their underlying message is unlikely to change. That their calls for justice are bigger than just Ferguson or Michael Brown. They're about fighting to change a system they say is stacked against them from birth.
Ferguson, City Under Siege from the Fault Line series. 5 years on, Rewind returned to Ferguson to see what had changed and how far the community had managed to move on. Award-winning St. Louis filmmaker Chris Phillips lives just a few metres from where Michael Brown was shot. His is a unique perspective on the divisions that remain in Ferguson today.
I've lived in Ferguson in excess of 13 years. You know, this was home for me. But in this part of town, this is where all of your social and public services are. This is where your economic development is emphasized, and this is predominantly where, or for the most part, where most of your white residents stay. So as we go under this overpass here, that's gonna be pretty much, we're gonna approach this intersection of Ferguson Avenue and West Florissant. That's where the big standoff between the people and the police were. You know, it was pretty much a peaceful protest. People were standing on the ground, you know, sitting on the ground. People had their hands up. And it was just, you know, it was just a standoff. And then as the evening progressed and it got to around like 9, 10 o'clock, that's when other activities kicked off. And that's the actual spot where the Quick Trip was, and that got burned down. So it's on the left here. But a lot of the businesses that are on this side of town, you know, haven't recovered or haven't rebuilt since what happened in 2014.
I'm Adolphus Pruitt, the president of the St. Louis City branch of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Yeah, there's been some improvement. The state legislature did act. You know, that helped a lot. Then you have the things like what the Urban League is doing on the site where the Quick Trip was, the things they're doing to deal with unemployed males and giving them the training and giving them the background. You know, those are improvement, but at the end of the day, it's equivalent to pissing in the ocean trying to cause a flood. The racial makeup of that police department, like many others, have not substantially or dramatically changed.
Everywhere we go, we get laid down, we get executed.
Most of the significant achievements we achieved in this country as relates to civil rights advancements, the vast majority of them happened either through the legislature or through the courts. And so the rulings that we got and the things that happened, those could not have happened without the protesters willing to sacrifice themselves, because they, at the end of the day, the brutality that they suffered, in which we took to the courts and got favorable rulings, somebody had to be on the receiving end of that.
When I look at where his body is, right, and my apartment was right around the corner here, right? So this spot in the pavement right here, this patch of pavement, this is where his body laid after he was shot 6 times. This is where they said that he turned around, he had his hands up. And then for 4.5 hours, his body laid out in this heat. So he laid out here and cooked for that amount of time. And so really a lot of the crowd presence that happened was not necessarily because somebody necessarily got shot. Of course, people are out here because of that, but being out here 1 hour, then 2 hours, then 3 hours, and the body is still there. And for a portion of that time, it wasn't even covered up. It's very horrific, it's very shocking. The images and the videos started spreading towards social media. And so when the police talk about their response as far as the crowd goes and how that happened, they're responding to a crowd because you left a body here in 4.5 hours. And what we know being here in Missouri and a lot of other places across the country is this would not happen in white communities.
Well, that's it from us. Join us again next time and do check out our Rewind page at aljazeera.com for more films from the series. But for now, goodbye.